Well, for many years I have been working on issues of natural capital. I used to be the Minister in the Department of Environment in the UK, and we have developed a programme in the UK beginning with our national ecosystem assessment. And that was really fundamental, because in the ecosystem assessment we have the database about what natural capital we actually have. If you haven't got that raw data, then it's very difficult then to put a value on it. So you have to first of all start with the data. We then set up something called the Natural Capital Committee to look at how one might go about valuing different aspects of the natural capital that we have. So looking at the value of forests, looking at the value of water, looking at the value of many of our natural resources, whether they be coal or gas or oil. All of these are things that we have to ascribe a value to, and then know how we're using them and how we're depleting them for the public good. Yes, I think I'd point to two. One was actually when I was the Minister. I put £6 million in my budget towards bee diseases, looking at the diseases of bees. And the Finance Ministry, the Treasury, thought I was crazy. We had a big argument and they said, "What are you doing spending all this money on bee diseases? We could build a hospital for humans with this money." And I said, "Look, fine, have your £6 million, but you must understand that if you do, it will cost you £194 million every year." And they thought I was even crazier, and they said, "Why? What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, look, we have just been told by the National Audit Office that the decline in our pollinators, in bees and other pollinators, has seen a decline in our agricultural production. And that decline in production has meant that we have less revenue coming into you guys in the Treasury. And that amount is £200 million a year. So, fine, keep your £6 million, but you're going to lose £194 million every year until you sort this problem out." They gave me my £6 million. So it's about being able to show the value that ecosystem services provide. Pollination is a very, very significant value. It's a very significant service. And when you can begin to quantify it in that way, then it can be accounted for in the decision-making processes. So that's one example of how these things can influence policy decisions. Look, I think it's very difficult. If you look at the success that the world has had with the Paris Summit, with climate change, that is relatively easy. You have one metric, that is a ton of CO2 emissions. Okay. We found it very, very hard to get an international agreement. For years we couldn't get an international agreement around climate, even though we had a single metric. Now, when you're talking about biodiversity, how do you weigh up the value of pollinators against the value of the Iberian lynx in Spain, or the value of clean air or clean water in different parts of the world? How do you weigh it up against oceans and the ecosystem services that they provide? These are very, very different metrics that we may have to construct. And I think it's important that we do, because it's only by being able to show that there is real value here that we ought to be taking account of in our cost-benefit analyses, that we can persuade the people who don't want to keep the oceans clean, who would actually like to put all their plastic into the ocean or all their sewage into the ocean. It's only by showing them the value of the ecosystem services that they're providing that they realize that it is in everybody's interest, including theirs, that they do the right thing. So it's important, but it's very, very hard. I think what's more important is that policymakers start regulating markets in a much more forceful way. We must start regulating the public goods that we know exist. So we know, for example, that the service of clean water, pure water, is important. We know that there are costs involved if we have to purify that water. And therefore, if farmers are putting too much fertilizer on their crops, or they're allowing their cattle to defecate in the rivers, we know that that leaches downstream and it causes problems that we then have to spend money purifying the water. So regulators have to understand that even if there isn't a clear metric that you can equate from pure water across to polar bears or pangolins, that these things are important, and we must begin regulating the public good that they provide. So metrics are important, they're difficult, but they shouldn't stop action. We need to get on taking action, putting regulation in place to preserve and enhance public good, and gradually, over time, we will be able to develop those metrics in a much more focused and structured way. It's very difficult because politicians operate on a very, very short time scale. We like to show our electorate that we can manage problems. That means we have to show them results very quickly. And of course, what we don't want to do is we don't want to sacrifice their financial well-being in the short term for the sake of long-term sustainable growth. That goes against the political timescale. The political timescale is short, 3 to 5 years. The financial timescale of the markets is short, 3 to 5 years. But that is precisely why you get problems like stranded assets. It's why you've got the governor of the Bank of England, why you've got the Financial Stability Board talking about the need to take on environmental risks into an understanding of portfolios. So we need to restructure the way that society, both financially and politically, think to get them to stop thinking always in the short term and to think more long term. It's very interesting because if you look at the CBD process, if you look at the Aichi targets, then one of the key goals, overarching goal, is about education. And it's enabling the public to understand the value of these services. Of course, many, many people in the public have an understanding of the value of nature. They love nature, they utilize nature for recreation, they go walking, they go out into the countryside, and they feel very much that that is part of nature. Whether you're in a developed country doing that as a sort of leisure time tourist in your own country, or whether you're somebody whose livelihood is intimately bound up with the environment and all the goods and services that it provides in a developing country. And of course, if you're the poorest people in the world, living on less than a couple of dollars a day, 50% of your GDP comes from the environment. So these things, people do have an innate understanding. But I think what we as politicians have to do is to actually not just regulate markets, but discipline people, because discipline is about deciding that what you want now is less important than what you want most. And that really is something that people have to, whether you're a child in a family, whether you're a citizen in a local community, or whether you're a global government talking to other governments. That's a discipline that we all have to respect and learn. Look, there are some countries that I think have a real understanding because they have been through disasters, right? And isn't it a tragic aspect of human beings that it's only when we have experienced the disaster, the thing going wrong, that we realize we have to change? So if you're a country that has experienced desertification or drought, you are much, much more acutely aware of the need for water, the need for forests to make sure that you have stabilized your soil, to make sure that you can conserve and protect land for agrarian purposes. If you're a country that has been through water shortage, of course it's clear to you that this is important. But very often countries actually don't take the right decision, don't come to that understanding until it's too late. And we see it in overfishing, we see it in the way in which forests are chopped down, we see it in all different ways in different countries around the world. So many of the people that I meet in international meetings, of course, share the same views that I have. We meet in UNEP, we meet in places where, of course, these are people who are coming there because they care about these things and understand. But they have the same problems that I do when I go back to my parliament, that many of my colleagues as politicians don't understand the importance of these things and end up taking the wrong decisions. I think it's not a lack of understanding between the scientific community and policymakers. I think it's a lack of understanding in finance departments and treasuries that these things are of real value and that their existing accounting framework focuses wrongly on gross domestic product. They must begin to understand that treasuries and finance departments are about conserving and enhancing the wealth of the country and the well-being of its people. And in order to do that, they have to increase the stock of public goods. Now, those public goods can be a strong legal system where many people want to come and trade because they know they have redress for contracts. Those public goods can be a strong educational system so that the population has skills that they can go and earn money around the world because of their skills. Or it can be in natural capital. And that, of course, it can be in coal, it can be in oil, it can be in metals and minerals. But it can also be in biodiversity. It can also be in rivers, in the quality of our air, the quality of our water, the capacity of our forests to produce for us, whether it be pharmaceuticals or fruit. And those are the values that I think our Treasury finds it much more difficult to understand.